Hello, everyone. My name is Robert, and I am a human services coordinator, a human services manager here with Music Cares. Welcome to our program, Mastering the Lost Art of Disagreement, ensuring communication for creativity and innovation. Just a little bit about Music Cares before we jump into the conversation for today. So, Music Cares helps the humans behind music because music gives so much to the world. We offer preventative and recovery programs during times of financial need. We provide services for a wide scope of music industry professionals, from the songwriter, the engineer, to the crew. If you have 5 years of paid music experience or at least six commercially released music credits, we can do our very best to assist you. We also have a variety of weekly support groups. We are now offering one-on-one financial coaching, and we have a new hip hop initiative entitled H3, all of which can be found on our website at www.musiccares.org. Now, just a bit about our speaker today. So, Ashley has been with the National Conflict Resolution Center, also known as NCRC, since 2005. She has been instrumental in the development and promotion of multiple programs at the NCRC. Ashley has worked diligently to position the organization as the global thought leader in the field of conflict resolution. Since then, NCRC has appeared on hundreds of local, regional, national media outlets, oftentimes with Ashley as the spokesperson. She has been featured in media outlets such as Forbes, The Washington Post, C-SPAN, NPR, Pop Sugar, and many others. As one of the senior leaders at the organization, Ashley has also helped develop training curriculum, which is why I am sure that we are going to get a lot out of this presentation today. So feel free to put questions in the chat. While registering for this program, you also ask questions. And so we're going to make sure that we definitely hit on those. But without further ado, can we all welcome Ashley? Thank you so much, Ashley. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Robert. And what a pleasure it is to be here with you all today. I really appreciate that you've all tuned in for this really important topic. And I'm sure that it's something that has been on your mind. I think to get us started, it's helpful to know exactly who we are and what we do and what authority we have to speak about conflict resolution. And so if you don't know, if you're not familiar with the work of the National Conflict Resolution Center, there's really kind of three areas that we work in, all having to do with navigating challenging conversations. The first is that we actually are hands-on in conflict resolution. So we are working with individuals to mediate active conflicts, do large group dialogues. When conflict is present in any industry, any part of the US, we are there and we can kind of help navigate that with neutral third parties to take you through that process. We also facilitate, so we facilitate a lot of those large town hall-like meetings, governance meetings, even things like contentious school board meetings. You kind of think of all those places we've seen on the news over the years where things can get a little out of control and heated. We're in that space and kind of giving them structure and giving them a place so that safe space can exist to talk about challenging issues where people have a lot of different viewpoints. And then the third area that we spend a lot of our time in is training, of course. And that could look like something like what we're going to do here today with just a kind of quick, hour-long workshop that will be interactive with some of your questions, all the way to we have kind of immersive training programs, workshops that are 3 hours in length, workshops that are full certificate programs, just really helping people in all different industries deal with the climate that we're in today and any difficult conversation that comes up, especially as it relates to our jobs and in workplaces. And so I'm thrilled to be here with you all today to talk about the music industry and the things that you are experiencing, the conflicts, the challenging conversations you're experiencing. And my guess is that many of you already have tools in your tool belt that you are utilizing as successful professionals to get through some of these conversations. And the goal today is to add to those tools and to just hopefully in a quick presentation, give you something new to think about or walk away with as you go into your next bus tour or contract negotiation or studio time, whatever it is. So I think it's helpful to start thinking about this question that we get asked all the time at NCRC. And that question is, how did we get here? And this question comes from a place, I think, where people are feeling a sense of conflict is like worse than it used to be, right? And I just want to say, I have been in this work for almost 2 decades. I've been in this work for 19 years. And I will tell you that when I started doing this work, there were a lot of people in my life who gave me the sweet, like, well, good for you. That's lovely. Go out and resolve conflicts, and it was kind of like, okay, sounds great, very nice. Well, right now, I mean, those same people in my life are coming to me with more of a desperate look in their eyes and more of a sense of what do we do, right? I mean, the fact that we cannot disagree with our peers, our colleagues, our neighbors anymore without it turning into a drag out fight these days is really breaking down so many important tenets of our society. And so we do get asked this question a lot, like, how did this happen? How did we get here? And this may seem a little trite, but here's my answer. 2020. And here's why. It's not just that there was a pandemic. We know that 2020 was one of the most infamous years that many of us will ever experience in our lives. But what happened during the pandemic that was so significant was how siloed we became. And when we think about this in the context of the lost art of disagreement, us losing our kind of ability to have small, even disagreements on a day to day basis with people around us, we actually do need to pause and think about how 2020, how the pandemic, and how isolating and quarantining and not being in our normal environments impacted us here. So you think about now, we're kind of back out there. Think about the daily interactions you have. And my guess is that there are moments in your day and in your life where you hear something that you don't agree with, that you meet someone or have to engage with someone you don't see eye to eye with. This could be at the dinner table at home. This could be at a PTA meeting. This could be at a choir practice or band rehearsal. There could be just all of these moments in our day to day that we experience where we just have these kind of micro disagreements, these little encounters. And prior to 2020, that was very normal. And it probably didn't cause all of the trauma that we kind of experience now when there are these disagreements and there's this flash instinct we have to like avoid it or attack the situation. And so 2020 really created a space where we got out of practice of having micro disagreements, which meant that our larger disagreements became all the more contentious. And in addition to that, we didn't have the opportunities for these micro disagreements, which are healthy, by the way. They're a good thing to have, especially as creatives, right? To be able to bounce ideas off of each other and really think about, are these lyrics how we want to go? And is the music, and do we want to make that negotiation with the label? And what do we want to do here? Those are important to have. Plus, we all know that media, news media, social media, it feeds us information that tends to agree with us, right? And so not only were we not experiencing our micro disagreements, but we were being fed news that was pleasing to us, that agreed with us. Maybe not pleasing in the headlines, but that tended to take our point of view. And the more you clicked on those, the more you went into that hole. So 2020 just was this beginning of really removing us from the practice of disagreement in healthy ways. And then you add into it that 2020 was a year full of hotly contested, divisive societal issues, starting with a massive and important racial injustice movement that our country had to navigate and deal with. Also, navigating the pandemic, navigating the arguments for and against vaccines. Should our kids be in school, not in school? There were big, big feelings and emotions around these things. But again, depending on where you landed, you may have been being fed information that more agreed with you, while someone on the other side of the issue was being fed information that agreed with them. All of this really helped us kind of other each other, other one another. And then, of course, in 2020, we have to acknowledge that we had a very contentious presidential election, right? And so these were big things that as a country were dividing us as a society. And then we went kind of back into work and we started getting back into schools and society and community, and we were out of practice in how we disagree. And so when we think about the workplace, whether you're creative and your workplace is in a studio, whether you're on the business side and you're more at the label side of things, or if you're a freelancer, there just have always been things that part of a job you've had to navigate things like, personality clashes. We don't like them, but they exist. That's always been a part of any job, is navigating personality clashes. Also dealing with warring egos, right? Kind of trying to make sure that everyone's needs are met in a space where ego can be a big deal. Working with limited resources, and even really tricky things like navigating, union, non-union. So a job has always asked individuals to navigate some of these things. Conflict has always been present in work. But what also kind of happened in this post-pandemic world is that more societal issues stepped into the picture. And so all of the sudden, workplaces, labels, different organizations were being asked to make statements or have a stance on issues that previously perhaps were not required of them. And so perhaps in kind of the music and recording industry, we've known that many individual contributors, individual artists maybe would take a stance on some issues, but it wasn't as common that as an entity there had to be a stance on them. And so we found that once again, you combine these things happening, you combine the fact that here we are really out of practice on how we have healthy disagreement, and we have more contentious, divisive issues showing up in our lives and interrupting our workflow. And so a lot of people just took the stance of, I'm either going to completely avoid these conversations, or when they come to me, I'm already going to be so on the defensive and so ready for them that maybe my response is more of an attack. And for some of you, and I really appreciate those of you who already wrote in with some questions you were thinking about leading up to this presentation. I know some of you are writing in some now as well, and thank you. Please continue to do that. One of the things that I heard in some of your questions ahead of this was like this feeling of being traumatized by conflict and actually having a response, like a post-traumatic response when conflict comes up now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, and we need to acknowledge, the way we have these conversations has shifted. And so it's not that there's not a solution to it, but a starting point for us becomes, how do we acknowledge? We have to acknowledge that, yes, it has shifted. We have gotten a bit more divisive, and we need strategies so that we can have healthy disagreement. And one of the strategies that we teach, that we've developed, and that I'm going to briefly go over today, is called the art of communication. And titled this The Lost Art of Disagreement. And so here, this is the art of communication, effective, healthy communication. Because one thing that you will hear me say over and over again is that disagreement is really important. It is the key to high functioning teams. And you all live in a space where creativity is at the core of what you do. And with creativity must come some pushback, right? Some disagreement, some need to have people maybe challenge what you're saying or want to take a deeper dive into it. And if we have our walls up and we don't allow for that, as individuals and as entire groups, we're going to be limited in what we can produce. And so it really becomes something that is incredibly important to figure out how to have disagreements in healthy ways. So I'm going to walk us through, again, briefly, not our full workshop, but I'm going to walk us through ARNT, this acronym that we have for an artful conversation, the art of communication. The A is going to stand for active awareness. This is our awareness going into conflict or when conflict or disagreement approaches us. The R is how we respond respectfully. And I'm going to challenge us a little bit there, maybe getting out of the norm of what we normally think of as responding respectfully and kind of thinking of it a little bit deeper. And then the T is really how do you troubleshoot together, especially with somebody that you don't agree with and potentially that you don't even feel like is responding respectfully to you, right? Maybe you're not being treated with respect. And so, how am I possibly going to kind of troubleshoot with this person? So, I want to just spend some time going through each of these. And again, this is about adding some tools to the toolbox today because I know that many of you have some amazing skills in this space. And so hopefully just some new ways of thinking about things. So let's dive into the A, the active awareness. So there's really two components I want to think about when we think about our awareness. And again, this is not even when we are thinking about the words we say in an argument, our response, or how we elicit information from other people or get them to participate. This is simply, the A is simply about our mindset, processing our perceptions in a certain scenario that we're going into. And so there's two components. The first is that we have to recognize that style differences are probably at play. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. And then also, we have to do our part to check our own bias and our own ego in the moment. And this isn't just stuff I'm saying because it's, makes us feel good to be better people. That's a great thing. And I want to be the best person I could be. But it's also really about strategy. These are strategies that help you move the conversation forward. And so sometimes being able to tap into our awareness and how we're processing the situation gives you a strategic advantage, actually, in some of these difficult to navigate conversations. So let's think about style differences for just a moment. One thing that we don't often consider is that there really are two levels to any conflict. The first is very obvious. It's the conflict itself. It's whatever the issue is. But the second is one that we forget to analyze very frequently, and that is how we respond. Everyone who's tuned in right now has a communication style in conflict. And what we do very naturally is that when we're in conflict with someone, we expect that they will respond with the same style that we have. And when they don't, it escalates it. So we have done a lot of work studying the research done by Dr. Mitchell Hammer, and he created a conflict style inventory. This is really important. He measured and looked at two variables when people are in conflict. So for any of you who have ever done any kind of assessment of yourself and you know what kind of personality type you are, what kind of communication style you are, you probably found that very insightful. When what we're talking about here and what we're looking about here is very specific to that moment where you're in disagreement with someone else, where your adrenaline is activated, right? You're probably experiencing fight, flight, or freeze. And in that moment, your communication style changes. And so I'm going to walk through these four communication styles, and I would ask each of you to think about which style most connects for you. So Dr. Hammer studied really two variables when communicating in conflict. And the first variable was the directness of the communicator. And the second variable was how emotive that individual was. Now, I always like to caveat this emotionally restrained, emotionally expressive variable because some of us out there really hate the F word, which is feelings, right? We run from feelings. So I don't want us to associate emotionally restrained or expressive with emotional, like overly emotional. All that this means here is that when you are talking about conflict, a part of the conversation for you is how it impacted you. For some of us, that's an important part of the conversation. For others, it's not a part of the conversation. It's just about fixing the issues. So kind of think about for you which one it is. So, okay, first of all, we have discussion style. If you are discussion style, you are a direct communicator, meaning you would rather address it sooner than later, and you are likely to go directly to the person you need to talk to address it. You're also going to be more on the emotionally restrained side. You're going to want to talk about it immediately, and you're probably going to stick to just the facts and the issues at play. Whereas if you are engagement style, you're also a direct communicator. You want to do this sooner than later. You're probably going to go directly to the other person. And a part of the conversation for you is that it was frustrating, or it was disappointing, or you felt disrespected. That's what I mean by kind of stating how it impacted you, that that's a piece of that conversation and it needs to be talked about in order for it to be resolved. Now, if you are accommodation style, you're more of an indirect communicator, meaning you may need more time to process. You may need more time to kind of think through how you want to respond. And when you do respond, it could be face to face, but it also maybe comes through an email where you have time to write it out. Accommodation style, you're going to be more emotionally restrained, kind of just sticking to the facts of whatever the conflict is. And then if you're dynamic style, same on the more indirect communication, you're going to take more time with it, process it out, maybe send an email, kind of work through it first. But again, part of processing it for you is that you have to talk about the impact. So let me give you an example. I was working with a team. I have my own team, and then I had a team that was temporarily assigned to me to help with a project. So not always under my supervision, but right now was. And we were all very tapped out, very maxed in terms of what we could do with our work days and the hours in them. And I had sent a request to somebody that I was temporarily supervising and asked them to do something. And they responded to me that they were too busy and politely declined my request. That was the phrasing that was used. And I found that frustrating. So to say the least, I was like, well, we got to get it done, like everybody's pitching in extra hours here. So let's break this down. If I am discussion style, I likely walked into that person's office and said, hey, I just got your email saying you can't do this request. And I hear you, we're all busy, but we got to get it done. So let's figure out some solutions. If I'm engagement style, probably exact same thing, but perhaps what I've added at that point is, and it kind of made me feel disrespected, or I didn't like that you just said, I'm not going to do it. I would have really preferred if you had just told me, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Can we work together on this? So a piece of it for me there as engagement versus discussion is saying like, that was disrespectful. Okay. If I'm accommodation style, I'm probably going to take a step back, think about it, maybe go home and kind of process it, work on an email, and then send the email to that individual, still saying, well, we still need to get this done and I need to work with you on that. But maybe it came through email, maybe I follow up via Zoom or in person or a phone call afterwards, but I've kind of processed it that way. And then if I'm dynamic style, gone home, thought about it overnight, maybe I even talked to someone else about it, right? Because I'm experiencing how it impacted me. So maybe I talked to my partner at home or another colleague and bounced some ideas off of them as I processed how I want to do my follow-up. So hopefully at this point, you in the audience, you've kind of thought about which style most closely aligns to you when you are in conflict. And I'm sure many of you are thinking right now, well, I kind of have one style at home and then, one style in my profession. And that's okay. I think that's very common. For the purposes of, this conversation, think mostly about the style that you take on in your professional work. And think about how it impacts your conversations. And what I want to do now is have us kind of rhetorically ask ourselves these questions. The first is, how do you want people to show respect to your style? What does that look like? How do people show respect to your style? My guess is that if you are somebody who is discussion or engagement style, one of the ways that you can be shown respect is to know that the conversation is coming, right? someone saying, hey, I know this is important. We're going to talk about it. But if you are accommodation style or dynamic style, you may need more time to process. And a way that someone can show you respect is by giving you that space, right? By saying, that's fine, we can talk about it tomorrow, you know? I have found that a lot of the time, people who are in the opposite style in terms of communication or emotional expression just need to know and like actually name and say out loud that we are going to talk about this. And at that point, knowing that takes off that fear of this is being avoided or this isn't going to be addressed. So thinking about what are ways that people can show respect to your style. And then alternatively, how can you show respect to other styles? And really think about that for a moment, because as you reflect on these different styles, I would guess that for many of you, you can identify a person that you work with that you know has like the complete opposite style of you. Perhaps you are someone who really needs time to process, talk it through with other people, and you know that by the time you come into a conversation, you are going to be like fully processed of how it impacted you and the way that and what you want to do about it. But if you are in a conflict with someone who's more discussion style, who wants to talk about it right away and does not want to bring any emotion into it, well, you're going to have a natural conflict there. And suddenly it's not just about the issue you're trying to deal with, but you start labeling each other, right? Oh, he's just so robotic and he doesn't care about this. I never hear anything. Or, oh, he's passive aggressive. Did you know he talked to someone else about this before coming to me? So we can kind of see how that escalates situations. And again, in some of the wonderful questions that came in beforehand, there were some questions that had to do with what do you do when someone just completely avoids you, or you feel like you're being gaslit, or you feel like you're being attacked. And while not everything can be boiled down to these communication styles, my guess is that that's a part of it. That the communication style, feeling attacked if you're a person who needs to process, is like a nightmare. But if you're a person who needs to talk about it right now, not knowing if it's going to have resolution is an equal nightmare, right? So keep these things in mind. This is all part of our active awareness as we get into disagreement, thinking, okay, hold on. Maybe this issue itself is not insurmountable, but maybe some communication style differences are at play. And if I know that and I'm thinking about that, those can be overcome. There are really good strategies to working with those. The other thing that we have to think about in our active awareness is, of course, bias. I mentioned kind of checking your bias and your ego. And we take a deeper dive in some of our workshops into bias. There are over 150 different kinds of bias, and they're all fascinating. Um, but the one I want to think about today, briefly, is confirmation bias, because this is something that is particularly hard to overcome as individuals. Confirmation bias being the tendency to look for information that supports rather than rejects one's preconceptions. So basically, our brains look for ways to confirm our existing beliefs about a person, ignoring any conflicting data. And I can give you a great example of this. I do a lot of traveling for my job, and all of that started about 10 years ago. And about 10 years ago, I was doing some traveling with a team of individuals who were, I would say, similarly aged to me, and we were in kind of a lot of similar like life spaces. And we were a really dynamic, great team on the road together. I enjoyed it because I am a wanderlust. I have a traveler's heart, and so it doesn't matter if you send me to the outskirts of Arizona. I am going to go, find an interesting cafe or a hike to take because I'm there and I have the opportunity. And so with this group, it was great to be able to do that. We would always do our work and put in the hours, but then, stretch ourselves to be able to explore wherever we were a little bit. And again, this was about 10 years ago, but I was suddenly paired with a new individual. And we were getting ready to go on a trip, and we met ahead of time to prepare. And I instantly recognized that she was older. In fact, she was a retiree. And I surprised myself at how almost instantly I was a little disappointed. And I had to check myself, like, what am I experiencing here? But my bias, and I had to be like, I had to acknowledge this to myself. My bias was telling me, oh, like, you're probably not going to have as much fun traveling with her. You know, she's probably not going to want to go out and have dinner or take a hike or explore around. Okay. Now, fortunately, I was aware of it almost immediately, because what can happen with confirmation bias is that I could have gone on that trip and actually self-perpetuated this. Because I had this small thought in the back of my head that we weren't going to have fun together, then I didn't invite her to the hike I wanted to go on. And then I end the trip and I go, yeah, see, we didn't do anything fun together. And right there, I have confirmed this bias I had about this individual, because I actually created a situation where I got to confirm this. And we have to know that our brains are actually wired to do this. In fact, they release little bits of dopamine when we confirm something that we want to believe. So our brain wants to confirm for us these things. But from a strategic standpoint, it does not help us, because we get blinded to opportunity around us. In this case, 10 years ago, I did invite her out for that hike. We had an amazing time. I've traveled with her many times since, and I genuinely look forward to those trips now. But, it was just something that, even as someone who teaches on bias, I had to go through that learning curve. So when we think about our awareness, recognizing that style differences may be at play, and recognizing that bias and, dare I say, ego may be at play certain times, even when we have the best of intentions, even when the other person is being like horrific, we still have to know these things could be at play. We have to think about training our brains to recognize this. We won't just automatically do it. And so we think about the two sides of our brain. One is our survivor brain. This is the brain that helps us survive dangerous situations. And it is important, but it is overused. We tend to rely on survivor brain, especially as we've gotten out of this practice of disagreement. And so now things that are not life-threatening or mentally threatening, we now fall into survivor brain, even on just kind of like more commonplace, like, I just don't like this person. And so we go into attack mode or avoidance mode. We need to work on exercising our more emotionally intelligent brain, the brain that helps us self-soothe, understand what our triggers are, but that also allows for curiosity, empathy, and really this awareness around processing what is happening. So the active awareness part of the art is critical, even though it has nothing to do with the actual words that we say in a conflict or how we move forward. But it is about training. I think about training my brain like I think about exercising any muscle in my body, so that when I need it, because oftentimes conflict and disagreement surprise you, right? You don't wake up in the morning knowing it's coming. But when I need it, it's well exercised, and this emotionally intelligent part of my brain can kick into gear and support me. So that's the active awareness piece. And again, it is critical to success in these conversations. But the other piece of it is also how we respond, and how we respond, especially when we really don't like what we're hearing. So I want to talk about how we respond respectfully. One of the things that we think about a lot in terms of being respectful in an argument is the idea of active listening, right? I mean, kind of listening to the other individual. But what are we frequently doing when we are, and I would say that we often correlate active listening with politely not interrupting, right? That's kind of actively, politely not interrupting. And what are we frequently doing when we do that? We're like loading up all of our counter arguments in our head, right? So, okay, as soon as they're done, I'm going to let them say their piece, but then I'm going to fact check that. I'm going to present this side of things. They're going to hear about this from me. And so there's no way we are actually engaged and actively listening to this other person, because very naturally, again, we are in a space where we're defensive. And so we're immediately trying to defend ourselves from their counter arguments. Also, I would guess many of us on here are amazing problem solvers. And so what we tend to do is want to jump into problem solving. And so our brain just goes like, bump, 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 and skips ahead 3 steps. Well, that also escalates conflict, because if we don't pause and actually do a respectful response to what was said, we're going to continue to go around in circles. So what I do is I quiz myself when I wonder, am I actually listening to this person with some genuine curiosity to hear what they have to say versus just waiting for my turn to respond? I ask myself, could I do these three things? The first is, and I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with this, but this idea of just demonstrating that you understood what the other person said. Okay, I heard you. I can kind of paraphrase what you said. Sometimes we stop there. So good job if this is something you do, just repeating back, okay, so what I heard you say was that, you need more time to develop this project. Boom. But the other thing that we sometimes don't do is acknowledge the impact, right? Reflect on any frustration, disappointment that the person had and that they've then expressed to you. And then the third component, and this takes a little bit of detective work, is try to identify what the underlying needs in the situation are. I don't have time today to get into the whole study of identifying underlying needs, but it is a critical foundation to an interest-based conflict resolution approach. What that means is that oftentimes what we hear and what we share with one another are our complaints. And our complaints are oftentimes surface level. They feel like a big deal in the moment, but they are a surface level fix for a larger need. So let's imagine that a group is on tour together and really getting under each other's skin after a long time and kind of struggling with some personality clashes. There could be some complaints about potentially sharing resources, right? But if those are addressed without addressing the underlying need of like some disrespect that has been shown within the team, then the surface level complaints will continue to evolve no matter how many times you solve them at that level. And sometimes we can't fix complaints, right? We have limitations in what we can do, but we can always address underlying needs. And so when I think about responding respectfully, and am I actually listening to this person? Can I demonstrate that I heard what they said? Can I acknowledge the impact that it had on them? And can I identify for myself and potentially for them what's underlying there? Now, let me ask you, does it say anywhere on here, agree with the other person? No, of course not, because this process doesn't mean you agree with them. But what this is an opportunity to respond in a way that opens the door for you to move the process forward. I would say that this step is the one that takes the most practice and is often skipped the most often because it's very hard to acknowledge some of these things when we vehemently disagree with another person. But another one of the questions or kind of series of questions that I saw in what was submitted before is, what do you do when you can't, kind of get a word in edgewise, or you hear the other person just continuing to repeat themselves, and you're not even at a troubleshooting point or a problem solving point because the other person is just like grandstanding. Well, I think sometimes, and this is actually proven in mediation, where you hear someone just repeating and repeating and repeating, that is actually a flag that trained mediators look for. And it tells you that that person has not felt heard. And so for them, I'm sure you've been in a situation where you've talked to someone, they're repeating, you say, I understand. Yeah, I heard you. Yes, I heard that. And okay, yes, I heard you. Well, just saying you understand for that person has not been enough for them to actually believe they are understood. And so by recapping, reflecting on the impact, and identifying the underlying needs, and that's really key, sometimes takes some detective work, sometimes takes some asking open-ended questions. And again, there's some strategies around that. That's where you actually move that person to a place of at least you've been heard. I don't agree, but you've been heard. And maybe I do. Maybe I learned something. That's always a possibility, right? In good creative conversation, that's the goal. But even if I disagreed with all of it, you've been heard, so we can move forward. We can move to another place. Okay. So that's the piece on respond respectfully. And then I want to talk lastly about the T, which is kind of this ability to troubleshoot together and really tell your perspective in a non-confrontational way. So this is where, if you've done your work to really focus on, I haven't jumped to problem solving, I've responded respectfully, I've gotten this person to a place where they can at least hear me better. This is where you kind of get into that space. So since we don't have, hours to go through like all the practice of what this would look like, I wanted to give you just some ideas, some sentence starters for how you do this. Because the whole point of this is that if you have moved the other person to a place where at least you're not just, yelling at each other or avoiding each other, but you're now having a dialogue, even a dialogue of disagreement. That's great. And you've accomplished a huge thing there. Telling your perspective in a way where they can be receptive to it is the other half of this equation. Again, this isn't just to be a good person. This is strategic for you to get what you need out of the situation. And so I always say, I mean, you might have the most important message in the world to deliver, but if you can't say it in a way that the other person can receive the information, you may have wasted your breath, So you want to be able to say things in a way where other people can hear them. And so what that looks like is, one, try to talk about things in terms of the situation rather than the other person, and attacking the other person. So just kind of saying like, hey, this whole thing's been challenging for me because, rather than, you did this and it was super embarrassing for me and really disrespectful. So on the one hand, great, and you're identifying that it was disrespectful, but it's kind of accusing that other person. They'll shut down with the "you did this." Whereas if you can talk about it from a perspective of, this has been really challenging for me because of these reasons. Again, it's just these small things that don't help people not shut off immediately. Another technique is, try to keep it to your interests, right? One thing that's really important to me, or our label, or this group we're with, is that we just have a foundation of respect for one another, right? So we can come at things from a different perspective. I know we're not going to see eye to eye on that, but all I'm going to ask is that we can at least talk to each other with respect, right? Or that we're successful. We all have something riding on this tour. So I need to know that we're going to be successful, and we got to work together through that. So keeping to interest instead of, again, those complaints. I love using we statements, and this may sound simple, but it is magic. It is magic. Many of you may be familiar with kind of I versus you statements, and those are effective, but we statements are amazing. Just saying, we're in this together. We need to think of a way to get around this issue. Either way, we're working together on this album, so we're gonna have to figure this out. We puts us in the same grouping, and that helps so much. And then, if possible, present options whenever you can. I love this technique because even dealing with high conflict personalities, if you can present options, number one, and this is like kind of options for solutions, you're in control of what you present, right? I mean, you in theory are okay. You might like one more than the other, but you're okay with what you present. But it creates buy-in, it creates an opportunity for the other person to be involved in the problem solving, which we know means that they are much more likely to stick to that solution. And so create options so that, one, you have some control over maybe what some of the solutions are, but you're involving the other person. We may not always get to a perfect resolution, especially after just one or two conversations. If it's a deeply entrenched issue, you may not even leave agreeing with each other. That has to kind of be okay. We can't be in just this like win-lose mentality. But almost always you can see ways where, hey, move the needle forward on that. Or, hey, we made progress. And if you can, like, celebrate the progress that was made. Look, we are never going to see eye to eye politically, ever, right? But I love that we can at least be respectful in our conversations with each other. That's really important to me. I appreciate that from you. I tell you, that will actually move the needle, even on a political conversation, more than anything else. Not that any of us are having those these days, right? I'm sure. So in a recap, remembering that art really involves active awareness, which is about recognizing style differences and checking for bias and ego. It's about responding respectfully, which is demonstrating that you heard what the other person said, trying to identify what the needs are, and also identify what the underlying impact was. And then when you troubleshoot, being able to tell your perspective in a non-confrontational way. I know this was like a whirlwind presentation on so much information, but again, hoping that this just adds, even if there's one thing you kind of take away from this or that you have a new perspective on, And we can always dive so much deeper into all of these skills. And for anyone who's interested, I look forward to that conversation with you if it's important to you and you want to. I know we have just a couple of minutes for some questions that have maybe come in, and I know Robert was kind of helping keep an eye on those. Thank you. As we transition into that piece of it, I just wanted to kind of put this up here. This is resources, and I know it says for workplace leaders, but it's really for any professionals. We have these resources that we offer it as part of our mission as an organization to just provide resources to any professionals in any industry who are navigating today's divisive times. And if you scan this with your QR code, you'll see we're like weekly updating with short videos, webinars, documents. I think the most recent thing that we just put up there, yeah, I have it here, is we just put up a little document that's 10 tips for navigating the political divide. We were getting a lot of questions around that. So you can, if you're looking for more, want to take a deeper dive into anything that I gave an overview of today, please feel free to scan this and take advantage of some of those free resources that we have and that we're constantly updating. So with that, I will want to make sure to leave some time for any wonderful questions that came in.
Ashley, thank you so much. So a couple of questions. One, um, how to keep the motivation up after a disagreement?
Keep the motivation up. Yeah, that's a great question. What I would say that's really important is, one, ending on that positive note. So like, no matter how much you're feeling like, oh my gosh, we did not make progress, find something to end on a positive note, even if it is literally just naming that it was a frustrating conversation and that you appreciate the other person was at least willing to have it with you, right? Like maybe it's that simple and that's the only positive takeaway. And from there, hopefully you learned something from or about that other individual in the course of that disagreement. So I always look at this as to my own advantage, like what will help me if I can show some curiosity or understand their stance a little bit better. What can I take away from that that helps me in my future interactions with them? Maybe it's just recognizing their style difference. Maybe it's understanding like, oh, they're a processor. Like I need to do this like right now. They're a processor. And actually that can be a really strategic advantage for me in future disagreements with them, giving them that little bit of space. So I wish there was like a magic wand that made us all feel just warm and fuzzy after every disagreement. I think we have to be realistic that can't happen. Like disagreement has to be allowed to exist.
Sure.
But there are things to take away and glean from it that, especially when you've got ongoing relationship, these conversations are even more important. And so you continue to do them as needed so that you save the time later by kind of continuing to learn about each other.
Absolutely. Very good. We had a couple of questions about when there is a disagreement and maybe the other person isn't willing to have the conversation, or maybe they avoid the conversation, or they leave whenever the conversation is present. How would you suggest that we tackle those scenarios?
So first, know that you are definitely dealing with a dynamic or accommodation style. So that's like that's kind of obvious right away. And probably what they may not want to have the conversation, but I think what you can do is approach them in a way that is more of a safe space for them, so to speak. So maybe it's an email, right? And just saying, hey, I want to give you time to process this. I know this isn't easy, but we have to talk about this. Um, Try to bring it back to values. So the reason I want to do this is not to hash up old things. It's because you're a valuable member of this team. And I don't see how we're going to be able to continue on this project unless we talk about it. So take a day or two if you need it, but please let me know a time in the next week that we can chat, right? So I just gave a varied example, but something like that. I mean, they may need some time. So I would say lead in with like, you can take a couple minutes, but here's what I want to talk about it, or take a day or two. Here's what I want to talk about. And this is why it's important to me that we do. And it's actually because I value you. Not because I just want to wag my finger at you, but I value you. And so, you know, but we're going to talk about it.
Very nice. And then one other question. How do you communicate with the boss or a person in a position of authority
Hmm.
who you may not who you may not agree with in an attempt to avoid retaliation?
Yeah. Yeah. So power dynamics are really challenging, aren't they? And this is something that I would say a lot of the answer could be nuanced based on each individual's particular situation, right? Because sometimes our power dynamic is a fair one, and you're still worried maybe about formal or informal retaliation, but it's a fair power dynamic. Sometimes it's an unfair power dynamic, and that has a different set of challenges. Not that they can't be worked through. So I want to be careful to say this answer is not a one size fits all, I would say. But one of the things that really works in almost any power dynamic is coming in stating your interests. So try as much as you can to not focus on just your complaints, because one of the things that I think people who have the power position may be able to do in that situation is immediately write it off, right? Like, well, we can't fix that. Or, well, the contract says this, so I'm just going to point to that. That's not fulfilling or rewarding for you. And so going to a place where you're coming at it from, hey, this is why this is really important to me. And this about me, but fairness is a really big core value of mine as an individual. So I wanted to bring this up to you because I know you value fairness also. And even if we can't fix what happened, I just want to look at it in the future. So generally speaking, try to come at it from that interest-based perspective instead of just the complaint. But again, I want to say there's always nuance to power dynamics because sometimes they're frustrating but fair, and sometimes they're not, and that takes a little bit of a different strategy.
Sure. Ashley, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for this presentation. We had a lot of questions, and I think you answered most of them. So, thank you so much. I really appreciated that you gave us step-by-step strategies like checking our bias and our ego, but also how to respond respectfully. And one of my biggest takeaways is the power of using we statements. I think
Hmm.
oftentimes we use I quite a bit because we want to be heard, but I think the we statements really unify us. So, thank you for that. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you could, let's just give Ashley a virtual round of applause for her time. Additionally, if you would love to know more about Music Cares, feel free to visit our website at musiccares.org. And if you have any questions specifically for some of the resources or the grants that we provide, you can email us at musiccaresrelief@musiccares.org. Ashley, any final thoughts?
Just want to say thank you. I appreciate it so much, and always happy to chat with anyone after this if we can be of any support.
Very good. Thank you so much. And if you register for this event, which you did because you're here today, we will have this recording available so that you can review at a later time. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see y'all next time.